All right, so welcome to this deep dive. And today we're going to be venturing into a place I think a lot of you are probably pretty familiar with, the subway. But we're not focusing on the usual hustle and bustle. You know what I mean? We're looking at the eerie side, the kind of unsettling feeling of being alone in a space that's usually filled with people.
Yeah, it's really interesting how subways transform after dark.
Right?
They become these kind of liminal spaces. They're
Right.
no longer these safe, predictable arteries of the city that we know.
Yeah,
They
exactly.
become something a little more uncertain, maybe even menacing.
Absolutely. And that uncertainty is really at the heart of our first story today. It's called The Stalker in the Shadows. And I want you to imagine yourself as a station manager wrapping up your shift at 3 a.m. You're heading to your office at another station. And as you board the train, you notice you're not alone.
Yeah, I mean, that feeling of being watched, especially in an environment that's designed for crowds, it can really trigger this like primal fear response. Studies actually show that our brains are wired to be hyper aware of potential threats in isolated environments.
And that makes sense.
And this heightened awareness can make even the most mundane encounters feel very unsettling.
Totally. So this manager gets on the train, and there's this man sitting in the back. He's bundled up in like a heavy jacket and a beanie. He doesn't say a word, but his eyes are fixed on the manager.
And that detail about the clothing is significant too, right? Because it obscures his features,
Right.
makes him seem less like an individual and more like this anonymous figure, which can be incredibly unnerving.
Yeah.
That anonymity feeds into our fear of the unknown, makes it harder to assess the potential threat.
So as the manager gets off at his stop, he realizes the man is following him. He rushes to his office, locks the door, but the feeling of unease doesn't go away. Then there's a soft knock, another knock, and a whispered voice, "Want to talk?"
So this behavior, the persistent following, the attempt to engage, it suggests an intent to intimidate, to exert control. It's a classic tactic used by stalkers to instill fear and to make the victim feel constantly vulnerable.
Yeah, the manager's understandably freaked out and doesn't open the door. He checks the security cameras, and there's the man standing outside staring right into the camera lens. Eventually, the man leaves, but the encounter doesn't end there.
Right, and this is where the stalker's behavior escalates.
Yeah.
It goes from simply unsettling to potentially dangerous.
Right.
The fact that he seeks out the manager again, it suggests like an obsession, a fixation.
Oh, wow.
And that can be a real red flag for more serious harassment or even violence.
Absolutely. So later, the manager's on another train, and guess who's sitting across from him?
Oh, no.
The same man, staring intently.
Yeah.
He finally escapes to a nearby Wendy's.
Smart.
But the man follows him there,
Oh, my gosh.
watches him through the window, and then vanishes. It's a chilling story that really leaves us wondering about the stalker's motives.
Yeah, and the ambiguity of the situation, that's part of what makes it so disturbing. We're left to fill in the blanks, to imagine the worst case scenarios. This story really highlights how a seemingly ordinary encounter can quickly escalate into a situation that feels threatening and out of control.
Absolutely. And it makes you wonder, what would you do if you found yourself in a similar situation?
Right.
That's a question I think we'll explore further with our next story. This one involves a group of friends on a late-night train ride that takes a terrifying turn.
Yeah, this next story, The Trap on the Train, it really illustrates the dangers of misplaced trust.
Yeah.
And also the importance of being aware of your surroundings, especially when you're traveling late at night.
So it's about 2 a.m. in New York City, and this group of friends is heading home after a night out. They're on a nearly empty train with just a woman in the next car. Then suddenly, they hear her scream for help.
And a scream in an enclosed space like a subway car, it's a really powerful trigger.
Oh, yeah.
It immediately sets off alarm bells in our brains,
Right.
signaling potential danger
For sure.
and the need for like immediate action.
Right. Our instincts in these situations are often to freeze or flee,
Right.
which is why it's so crucial to have a plan in place before finding yourself in such a situation.
I think you're right about that. Their instincts tell them something's wrong. So they peek through the glass between the cars. They see two hooded men way too close to the woman, and one of them has a gun.
And the presence of a weapon, that significantly increases the risk level of the situation.
Of course.
Right. This is no longer just a potential threat. This is an imminent one.
Totally.
And the friends are now faced with a really difficult choice.
Yeah.
Do they intervene or do they prioritize their own safety?
Right. It's a split-second decision with potentially life-altering consequences. Seeing the gun, They know they're outnumbered and outmatched, so they make a run for it, bolting to the next car. But the men are right behind them.
And this chase through the train, that really adds to the terror of the situation.
Oh, for sure.
The confined space of the subway car, the inability to escape,
Right.
the sense of being hunted, it all contributes to a feeling of utter helplessness. I can't even imagine. They try to lose the men by running through multiple cars, but the chase continues until the train finally comes to a stop. The friends scatter, hiding behind seats and in corners, hoping to avoid detection.
And this is where the concept of the bystander effect comes into play.
Yeah, what is that?
So studies have shown that people are less likely to intervene in an emergency situation when there are others present.
Oh, interesting.
They assume someone else will take action, or they fear putting themselves at risk. Unfortunately, in this case, it seems like the friends initially fell victim to this psychological phenomenon.
Wow, so it's like a real thing.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So one of the friends ends up hiding behind a garbage bin. And as the men search for them, he overhears a chilling threat. If you find them, kill them.
And that statement reveals the level of violence the attackers are willing to use, makes it clear that this is a life or death situation.
For sure.
The element of surprise.
Yeah.
And the escalation of aggression, it adds another layer of complexity to the bystander effect in this scenario. You know, the friends are now not only dealing with the inherent fear of intervening,
Right.
but also with the very real threat of deadly force.
And just when they think it can't get any worse, the woman from the train walks up to the men and asks, "Where are they? Don't tell me you didn't get them." It turns out it was all a setup, a trap designed to lure unsuspecting passengers into a dangerous situation.
This unexpected twist is what makes this story so terrifying.
Right.
It highlights the vulnerability of trusting strangers,
Totally.
especially in unfamiliar environments. You know, we often rely on social cues to assess potential threats.
Right.
But in this case, those cues were deliberately manipulated to create a false sense of security.
The friends managed to escape, but the experience left them deeply shaken. I think it's a stark reminder that sometimes the most dangerous threats are the ones we don't see coming. But before we get into how to stay safe in these situations, let's hear about one more encounter that will truly leave you wondering what's real and what's a nightmare.
Yeah, this next story kind of blurs the lines between reality and hallucination.
Okay.
It leaves us to question what we can trust and how our perception can be distorted in moments of fear.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Our final story, The Tunnel of Terror, takes us back to a familiar setting, an empty subway station late at night. This time, we meet Danny, a young man in his early 20s, who's on his way home from a party. As he arrives at the station, it's completely deserted.
And that feeling of isolation in a place that's usually bustling with people can be incredibly unsettling. You
Yeah.
know, it activates our primal instincts, making us more susceptible to perceiving threats,
But
even if they're not real.
as he's waiting for the train, Danny hears a voice coming from the tunnel. "Over here, buddy." He looks over, and there's a man standing on the tracks, staring at him with a grotesque smile. Then another man appears, and another. They're laughing and beckoning him to join them in the tunnel.
This scenario is particularly disturbing because it plays on our fear of the unknown.
Oh, totally.
Right.
Yeah.
The figures in the tunnel are shrouded in darkness, their modals are unclear,
Right.
their laughter could be interpreted as menacing or playful.
Yeah.
It further adds to the uncertainty and fear.
So creepy Danny tries to ignore them. But then he sees something that makes his stomach churn. One of the men is holding what looks like a decapitated head.
And this detail is incredibly disturbing.
Oh my gosh.
It adds this visceral element to the story.
Right.
You know, it's difficult to determine whether this was a genuine threat, a cool prank, or even a hallucination brought on by fear and stress.
Oh, wow.
However, the ambiguity just adds to the terror of the experience.
The train arrives just in time, and Danny jumps on, completely shaken. As the train pulls away, he sees the men huddled together, their eyes locked on him through the window.
And this image of being watched as you escape a potentially dangerous situation is a common theme in like horror stories and nightmares.
Right.
It reinforces that feeling of vulnerability.
Right.
And it suggests that the threat might not be over, even when you think you're safe.
Danny reports what he saw to the conductor, but he never finds out what happened to those men in the tunnel. To this day, he avoids that station, opting to walk an extra mile rather than risk another encounter.
Yeah, and this avoidance behavior is a classic symptom of trauma.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Even if the threat wasn't real, the experience was real for Danny.
Of course.
And it has shaped his perception of that particular station,
Right.
and perhaps even the subway system as a whole.
Absolutely. This brings up an important question. How can we stay safe in an environment that can feel so unpredictable and potentially dangerous? That's a great question, and one we'll be tackling next. These stories have definitely painted a chilling picture of what can happen when the lights go out and the crowds disappear in the subway. But before we let fear take over, let's shift gears and talk about what we can learn from these encounters.
Right, because while these stories are undoubtedly unsettling, they offer valuable insights into the psychology of fear,
Yeah,
and they provide us with practical tips for staying safe in potentially dangerous situations.
exactly. Let's dive into those safety tips because knowledge is power, especially when it comes to navigating the unexpected.
I think these stories really highlight how vulnerable we can be, even in places that we think of as safe public spaces.
Yeah, for sure. And while we can't control everything that happens around us, I think we can empower ourselves with knowledge and strategies to try to stay as safe as possible.
Absolutely. So, based on these subway encounters, what are some things that our listeners can do?
Right. To feel more confident, more prepared.
Yeah, I mean, the first one that comes to mind for me, and I know it sounds kind of basic, but is just trust your instincts.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Like, if something feels off, if
Oh, yeah.
someone is giving you bad vibes,
Exactly.
or a situation just seems unsafe, it probably is.
Right.
Don't dismiss those feelings.
Yeah.
That gut feeling is like our internal alarm system.
It really is. It's our subconscious processing information and warning us of potential danger.
And a key part of trusting those instincts is being aware of your surroundings.
Yeah.
Right. And this is especially crucial in subway stations and trains, especially late at night.
Especially late at night.
Who's around you? Are there any unusual activities? Just pay attention to those details.
Totally. Put away the phone.
Yeah.
Take out the headphones and just really be present in the moment.
Be present. Situational awareness is key.
It is. And whenever possible, travel in groups.
Yeah.
Especially late at night.
Yeah.
There's safety in numbers,
Absolutely.
We saw that in that second story.
Yeah.
It's like having backup,
Yeah.
even if it's just your friends.
Right. And this might seem obvious, but know the location of emergency exits and intercoms.
Yeah.
On trains, on platforms.
Right.
Familiarize yourself with the layout of your usual stations.
For sure.
In a stressful situation, knowing where to go for help can be crucial.
It's all about being prepared,
It is.
even if you hope you never have to use that knowledge.
Exactly. And finally, if you ever feel threatened, don't hesitate to seek help.
Yeah.
Immediately. Approach a station agent, a transit employee, or even a fellow passenger.
Huh?
Call 911 if necessary.
Yeah. It's better to be safe than sorry.
It is.
Don't be afraid to speak up and ask for help.
Absolutely. And remember, these tips, combined with just general street smarts
Right?
and a healthy dose of caution,
Yeah.
they can go a long way in ensuring your safety on the subway.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, these stories, they're unsettling, but I do think that we've gotten some really good insights about staying safe. It's about being aware, trusting our instincts, and being prepared. What are your kind of final thoughts on all of this?
I think it's important to remember that while these stories highlight the potential dangers of the subway,
Right.
they don't represent the everyday experience for most people.
Yeah.
Millions of people use the subway safely every single day.
Totally.
The key is to balance vigilance with enjoying the convenience and the connectivity that it offers.
Yeah. Well said. Don't let fear paralyze you,
Right.
but definitely be informed
Yeah.
and be prepared. And listeners, this is where we kind of turn it over to you. Have you ever had a strange or unnerving experience on public transit? We'd love to hear about it. Share your stories in the comments. Let's keep this conversation going. But before we go, I have one more question for you.
I'm all ears.
These stories, they really got under my skin.
Yeah.
There's something about those empty subway stations and the dark tunnels that just feels unsettling to me.
Mm-hmm.
Is there like a psychological reason
Mm-hmm.
why we find these environments so creepy?
There are actually several factors at play. One is the concept of environmental psychology, which studies how our surroundings influence our emotions and behaviors.
Okay.
Subways, particularly at night, can kind of violate our expectations of what a public space should be like.
Mm.
They're designed for crowds, for movement, for light and activity.
Right.
When those elements are absent, it creates this dissonance
Right.
that can be unsettling.
It's like our brains are saying, this isn't right.
Yeah.
Something's not as it should be.
Exactly. And this feeling is amplified by the fact that subways are often underground,
Right.
literally removing us from the safety and familiarity of the world above,
Yeah.
We're in a confined space, cut off from natural light and open air,
Right.
which can trigger feelings of claustrophobia and vulnerability.
It's like being in a concrete jungle, but without the safety of the pack.
Right. And then there's the historical and cultural baggage that subways carry.
Oh, interesting.
They've been the setting for countless crime dramas, horror films, and urban legends, which feeds into our collective subconscious
Totally.
and shapes our perception of them as places where bad things can happen.
So it's not just our imagination running wild.
It's not.
There's a real psychological basis for our unease.
Absolutely. And these factors, they all combine to create this potent cocktail of fear and anxiety,
Wow.
even if we're not consciously aware of it.
That's so fascinating how our environment can have such a powerful impact on our emotions.
Wow.
It makes you think twice about those late night rides, doesn't it?
It certainly does. But remember, awareness is key.
Right.
By understanding these psychological factors, we can better manage our own anxieties
Right.
and make informed decisions about our safety.
Well said. And on that note, we'll leave you with this final thought. The next time you find yourself in an empty subway station, take a moment to acknowledge those feelings of unease.
Yeah.
Don't dismiss them, but don't let them control you either. Use that awareness to stay vigilant, trust your instincts, and navigate the subterranean world with confidence.
Yeah, it really is amazing, isn't it? How, our surroundings can have such a profound effect on us.
Totally. Especially in places like the subway, where you're often surrounded by strangers.
Right.
You're in a confined space.
Right, exactly. And we've seen in these stories, right?
Yeah.
Those assessments, those feelings can be skewed by fear or stress, or even just the atmosphere.
The eerie atmosphere of an empty station that can get to you.
Exactly. So it's so important to be aware of these psychological factors.
Absolutely.
And to develop those strategies, for managing our anxieties.
Right. We can't eliminate fear altogether,
Of course not.
but we can learn to recognize it, understand its triggers, and use that knowledge to make informed decisions.
So it's not about letting it paralyze us, but using it as a tool.
Exactly. Fear can be a powerful motivator.
Right.
It can prompt us to take action to protect ourselves. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's important to remember that not every situation is dangerous.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. And sometimes the unease that we feel is just our imagination.
Right. It's just our mind playing tricks on us.
Which brings us back to the importance of trusting our instincts.
Yes.
We need to be able to discern, right?
Yeah.
Between a genuine threat
Right.
versus something that we're just perceiving.
And that discernment comes with experience,
Okay.
awareness, and a healthy dose of critical thinking.
So being able to assess the situation,
Right.
evaluate the information,
Yeah, exactly.
and make a judgment call.
Based on the evidence.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
So it sounds like staying safe on the subway and just in life in general.
Yeah.
It's about this balance of
Right.
vigilance, but also common sense.
It is. We need to be aware of the potential dangers, but we don't want to become overly paranoid or let fear dictate our actions.
I feel like these stories have given us a lot to think about.
Yeah.
They've highlighted, maybe the darker side of the subway.
For sure. The unsettling encounters that can really stay with us.
Totally, even after we've gotten where we're going.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they've also reminded us that knowledge is power.
It is. By understanding the psychology of fear,
Right.
the dynamics of social interaction, the importance of situational awareness, you can navigate the subway and the world beyond with greater confidence and resilience.
And perhaps even more importantly, these stories have encouraged us to trust our instincts.
Absolutely. To listen to that inner voice that whispers warnings in the face of uncertainty.
Because in the end, right, it's often that gut feeling, that primal sense of self-preservation.
Exactly.
It gets us through the shadows.
And leads us back to the light.
Well said. Well, on that note, I think we're going to wrap up this deep dive into the eerie side of subways. We hope you found it insightful, thought-provoking,
Yeah.
and maybe even a little bit empowering.
And remember, even in the darkest tunnels, there's always a light at the end of the track.
Thanks for joining us. And until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and keep exploring the world with curiosity and courage.